Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Our guests, Dr. Narendra Jadhav, President Pankaj Bhai Patel, Vice President Rohit Bhai Patel. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to welcome you all on this 9th Raman Bhai Patel Memorial Lecture with the topic Emerging Institutional Architecture for Excellence in Higher Education, which will be delivered by Dr. Narendra Jadhav, who is the member Planning Commission and also the member of the National Advisory Council, Government of India. The Raman Bhai Patel AMS Center for Excellence in Education was set up in 2001 in memory of the late Mr. Raman Bhai Patel, the visionary pharma entrepreneur, industrialist, also who was himself interested in research and education. And this center was inaugurated in 2001 by Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. And subsequently, we had great speakers for the other 8 lectures. Dr. Jadhav, it's indeed great to have you at AMA and listen to you. And I'd request our president, Mr. Pankaj Bhai, to welcome him with a bouquet of flowers and then introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Our distinguished speaker for this evening, Dr. Narendra Jadhav, Mr. Rohit Patel, Vice President AMA, Mr. Radia, Honorary Treasurer AMA, ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to warmly welcome you here for this meeting. We have gathered here this evening to carry forward an interesting exploration of thoughts that we have been exploring since last 8 years. It's to do with learning, education, and how we can as a community raise the bar as we move forward. Since inception, we at Raman Bhai Patel AMA Center of Excellence in Education have been looking at opening of minds, creating a platform that can stimulate discussions, facilitate exchange of views and sharing of thoughts in the field of learning and education. Starting with Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, the former President of India, who had inaugurated the center in 2002, we have been looking at how the child's world of learning can be nurtured and enriched. We had educationists, policymakers, scholars, and thinkers sharing with us their insights and thoughts on the new trend and approaches in the education. Dr. Karan Singh, Swami Vimlananda, Professor Rajshekharan Pillai, Professor Govardhan Mehta, Dr. Rangarajan, Professor Yashpal are some of the other speakers who have shared their vision of education with us. Shri Raman Bhai B. Patel AMA Center for Excellence in Education was set up with the belief that right education can be a catalyst in the process of transformation in the thoughts and action of children and thus leading to progress and growth. The center regularly conducts open house discussions, progressive learning programs for academicians, mentoring programs, and knowledge sharing forums looking at new dimension in the learning and education. The center has also honored the contribution of teachers in the child's world of learning through the Shrestha Shikshak Award. Over the last 7 years, the center has felicitated 14 Shrestha Shikshak who have been torchbearers in the community, igniting the spark of learning and a catalyst for social change in the rural communities of Gujarat. Taking this step further, the center, along with the Raman Bhai Foundation and the Zydus School of Excellence, has plans to initiate a Shiksha Shikshak Jagruti Abhiyan, a program which empowers Shrestha Shikshaks to inspire, encourage, and create more such torchbearers in the communities all around. Our speaker for this evening, too, with his prominent contribution in the field of education and social initiative, has been instrumental in bringing about a social change in the society. An educationist, academician, administrator, and statesman, Dr. Narendra Jadhav has received several awards in recognition of his efforts in the field of education, literature, culture, and social work. Dr. Narendra Jadhav is presently serving as a member Planning Commission, Government of India, in the rank and status of a Minister of State. As a member of Planning Commission, Dr. Narendra Jadhav oversees education, labor, employment, and skill building beside other activities. Dr. Jadhav was also Vice Chancellor of University of Pune. In less than 3 years, under his leadership, the university was transformed into a dynamic, vibrant, and social conscious, and indeed a model state university. In a long and distinguished career, he has held several prestigious posts at the Reserve Bank of India, the International Monetary Fund, besides other international postings. A prolific writer, Dr. Jadhav has authored 11 books and over 100 research papers. His biography in English, Untouchable, has been an international bestseller, translated in almost 17 languages. The Punjabi version of the book had won the coveted Sahitya Academy Award. As more information about our celebrated speaker today is more readily available with you in the brochure which we have given to you and distributed, but that's why I'm not going further and explaining everything further. But we are fortunate that we have such an eminent speaker amongst us today. Dr. Jadhav is going to address us on the emerging institutional architecture for excellence in higher education. Once again, I take pleasure in welcoming Dr. Jadhav and all of you for this evening. Thank you very much.
Shri Pankaj Patel, President of AMA, Shri Rohit Patel, Vice President AMA, Shri DJ Radia, Honorary Treasurer, colleagues and friends, good evening. It's indeed a great pleasure as well as an honor to be here this evening with you. And I feel greatly honored to have been invited to deliver the 9th Raman Bhai Patel Memorial Lecture organized by the Raman Bhai Patel AMA Center for Excellence in Education. When Pankaj Patel was introducing me, and they have given a longish introduction in the pamphlet that has been circulated, there is one mention that has not been made, and I must say that at the very outset. The book that he referred to is published in many languages, including Gujarati, and the publisher of the Gujarati version is right here, Kishore Gaud. He published that, and it has gone through several editions. And one of the earliest occasion to translate that, I originally wrote it in Marathi. It came before going into other languages. It came in Gujarati, and it has done very well. I thought I must mention that. Also, another thing that I want to mention is that every time I come to Ahmedabad, I see a further improvement, and one cannot but notice the change that is taking place, and therefore it gives me a great pleasure to be among you this evening. Well, as I said, I feel greatly honored that I have been invited for this 9th Raman Bhai Patel Memorial Lecture, and I also feel rather humbled when I take a look at the galaxy of stalwarts who have spoken here in this lecture series. Many of them, the complete list of 8 speakers is available with you, but 4 names I must mention: Dr. Abid Hussain, Justice Bhagavati, Dr. Karan Singh, Dr. C. Rangarajan. These are the people who have been my gurus. So I feel truly humbled to have been invited to be here with you to deliver this 9th memorial lecture, 9th Raman Bhai Patel Memorial Lecture. This memorial lecture has also given me an opportunity to pay my tributes to the memory of Shri Raman Bhai Patel. We all know that there are people who blaze the trail, and there are those who trail the blaze. Raman Bhai was in the category who trailed the blaze. Raman Bhai, as a multifaceted personality, he was a stalwart of the Indian pharmaceutical industry. He was an eminent educationist. He was an outstanding researcher. And I am very happy to note that he was also a versatile poet. So with all these contributions, it is no wonder, I feel greatly honored that I have got today this opportunity to pay my tributes to the memory of, and today is his birthday, so I feel greatly honored to speak here in this forum on this occasion of the 9th Raman Bhai Patel Memorial Lecture. As it has been announced, I am going to speak on the emerging institutional architecture for achieving excellence in higher education. This is a very broad subject. What I want to do is to first talk about the importance of education. Then I will talk about the present status. Then I will talk about the kind of problems that we are facing at the macro level and at the micro level. And then talk about the kind of changes which are taking place. I must tell you that there are metamorphic changes which are taking place in the Indian higher education sector. And I dare say that at no time in the last 63 years, so many changes were taking place at the same time. I also dare say that in the next 18 months or thereabout, the Indian higher education system would be unrecognizably different from what it has been. But to understand fully the import of the changes which are taking place, the metamorphic changes which are taking place, I think we need to begin with the importance of education and go on building on that and end in talking about the new or emerging institutional architecture that is emerging, which will take us to excellence in higher education. Well, we all know that education plays a vital role in the growth and development of any nation. It is increasingly being recognized world over that the countries with greater capacity to absorb and generate new knowledge and skilled human power are likely to have a comparative edge and advantage in attaining as well as sustaining high economic growth over the other countries that do not. So the countries which have ability to absorb and generate new knowledge and skilled human power, they tend to do much better. They have an advantage in attaining and maintaining the higher economic growth over the countries that do not. The underlying logic is straightforward. What education does essentially is to improve the functional and analytical capabilities of individuals. This opens up opportunities for individuals as well as social groups to achieve greater access to employment opportunities and professional fulfillment. Moreover, education is not only an instrument of enhancing efficiency, but it also forms the backbone of socio-economic transformation. It is an effective tool for widening and augmenting demographic participation and upgrading the overall quality of individual and societal life. That said, I also want to emphasize that the importance of education, particularly higher education in India today, is more than ever before, for at least two reasons. First, the fortuitous occurrence of the so-called demographic dividend, and second, even more fortuitous is the timing of that occurrence. We all know, and we keep talking about it, because of the persistent decline in the dependency ratio in India, it has meant India having the world's youngest labor force. We all know that the median age of India in the year 2020 is expected to be about 29, at which point the USA as well as China will have average or median age at the level of 37. In Western Europe, it is expected to be 45, and in Japan, it is expected to be 48, which means that we have a very large and substantial, large and growing youth power, which we need to utilize. It also means that while elsewhere in the world, in China and in industrial countries, dependency ratios are rising and the youth population shrinking. When that is happening, India is blessed today with a population, with the population in the age group of 10 to 19, around 225 million people in the year 2006-7. So current estimate would be about 240 million people. Please note that 240 million people in the age group of 10 to 19 happens to be the largest cohort of youth moving into adolescence, not only in India, in the history of mankind. Never before in the history of mankind, such a large number of people were making a transition to adolescence in the age group of 10 to 19 with 240 million people. And we also know that 70% of our population is below the age of 35. Now, this gives a great advantage over others. Not too long ago, we were talking about population as a major problem. Not anymore. We all recognize worldwide that it's not the size of population that matters, it is the age composition of population that matters. And as far as age composition is concerned, India has a distinct advantage in terms of having large and growing young population. So that's one reason. Second reason why education is very important is that this demographic dividend is becoming available to India coinciding with the phase of exceptionally high economic growth. This is very important too. The timing of demographic dividend is also very important too. We all know that between the period 1992 to 2002, India had a real GDP growth of average 6%. 2000 to 2005, it was 8% on an average. 2005 to 2008, it was 9% on an average before the world crisis, the global meltdown took place. And now, in the last 2 years, we are coming out of that, and the growth rate was the first year after the global economic crisis hit us and everybody else. The growth rate was 6.7% in the year 8-9. In 9-10, we improved it to 7.5. This year, we are talking about 8.5%, and next year, we are talking about crossing 9%, and in next 3-4 years, we're talking about crossing the double-digit growth. So fortuitously, again, what is happening is that the demographic dividend is becoming available to us at a time when India is on the expanding the path of acceleration in real GDP growth. Needless to say that this tremendous human resource potential would have to be converted into reality, and in this process, it is the education and skill development which is going to play a critical role. It is really the education and skill development that holds the key to the future. In other words, India's transition towards emergence, towards her emergence as the global reservoir of skilled person power and the resultant status as an economic powerhouse critically depends on our ability to leverage this demographic dividend. This would in turn be contingent on making the higher education and skill development sector robust, forward-looking, and vibrant. Indeed, if we do not reform our higher education sector, and if we fail in harnessing the demographic dividend that is fortuitously available to us, there is a possibility that what we now call demographic dividend would turn out into a demographic disaster. It can become a millstone around our neck. So critically, it depends whether or not India would make a move to higher trajectory. You know, I have always felt, and I have been saying this, that from where we are, getting into double-digit growth is not all that difficult, because the very momentum that economy has got is going to push us there into double-digit growth in the next 3-4 years. The question is, are we going to be able to sustain that? And I say it without any hesitation that unless we bring about a comprehensive change in our higher education and skill development sector, there is just no way that we can possibly sustain our higher growth trajectory. With this, let us understand what are the ground realities. Where do we stand today? The second part of my speech is the dimensions of the higher education sector. Without any doubt, one can say that the spatial expansion of the network of higher education sector in India over the years has been quite impressive. At the time of independence, I'm just throwing some numbers for you to get an idea of where do we stand now. At the time of independence in 1947, there were only 20 universities, around 500 colleges all over the country, and only 2.4 lakh students. Over the years, the Indian higher education system has grown into one of the largest one in the world, next only to the United States and China. According to the latest data available, which we have released recently, last week as a matter of fact, in our midterm appraisal of the 11th five-year plan, you'll see that today we have as many as 504 universities. We have nearly 26,000 colleges. The total overall student enrollment is 1.5 crore, and the faculty strength all over the country is a little more than 5 lakh. Contrary to the general belief, let me also say what constitutes the bulk of Indian higher education sector is these state universities. Presently, we have a structure of higher education which has many different categories. So there are 243 state universities, and most of the state universities have very large number of affiliating colleges. And until last year, I was leading one of them, the University of Pune, which happens to have, just to give you an idea, which happens to have 650,000 students and more than 600 colleges affiliated to that. Most of my American friends used to think that I'm adding a zero by mistake. There is no mistake. The largest American university is less than 46,000 students. Here we have in Pune University 650,000 students. So most state universities tend to have very large number of affiliating colleges, and they have also very large number of students. Sometimes we forget that if you look at our educational structure, there's a lot of talk about deemed to be universities, private universities, and other institutions created. Fact of the matter, and central universities, there is a kind of caste system in the education system, higher education sector. But often people forget that 85% of all our student population goes to state universities, because that happens to be the mainstay, the backbone of higher education sector. So in addition to the state universities, there are about 40 central universities, 131 deemed to be universities, 53 straight private universities, 33 institutions of national importance established under central legislation, 5 institutions established under state legislation, and together, other than state universities, all others put together, they contribute to only 15% of the total student population. When we turn to the technical education sector, which incidentally also includes management institutes, some numbers which would be of interest to you is that by end of August 2008, there were 8,568, so about 8,600 state-funded institutions, which comprised about 2,400 engineering colleges, about 1,660 polytechnics, about 1,600 institutes of pharmacy, 172 institutes of hotel management, and there are schools of architecture, art and craft, and so on. In addition, there were about little more than 1,500 management institutes and little more than 1,100 institutes for computer applications. This was changed. The breakup is not available, but the aggregate numbers I can give you. By June end 2009, in India we had 7,300 technical institutions. I am rounding the number up, 7,300 technical institutions offering degrees, and about 2,300 plus offering diploma level institutions. And the total technical education enrollment was placed at little more than 24 lakh, of which little more than 19 lakh were for degree and about 5 lakhs were for diploma. We are right now going through the 11th five-year plan, and 11th five-year plan has placed a great emphasis on expanding access to education at all levels. As far as higher education is concerned, the 11th plan has envisioned a large-scale expansion by setting up 1,465 new institutions, including 30 central universities, 8 new IITs, 8 new IIMs, 10 national NITs, that is National Institutes of Technology, 5 Indian Institutes of Information Technology, IIITs, 5 Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research, ISERs, 2 schools of planning and architecture, 374 model degree colleges in backward districts, and as many as 1,000 polytechnics, of which 300 are expected to be in public sector for educationally backward districts, another 300 in terms of PPP mode, and the remaining 400 of polytechnics would come from private ones. Now this looks very big, but actually it is not. The expansion that has taken place is looks very impressive, but looking at our needs, it really is not, and I want to explain that. You know, while the enormous physical and spatial expansion of higher education in India over the years has been quite significant, and it led to some people, until just few years ago, people used to boast that we have the 3rd largest trained person power in the world. Not anymore, because increasingly it is being recognized everywhere that you cannot talk about the absolute number of people who are trained personnel, and the number of, or the total number of trained personnel which was available to us when the growth rate was at 3.5% is not relevant anymore. With the growth rate going in the range of 8% plus and moving on to 10%, what appeared very reasonable earlier is no longer reasonable, and therefore we have to ask a question: is the enlarged education sector consistent with the national aspirations, such as achieving and maintaining high growth trajectory of double-digit real GDP growth? We may also ask whether the enlarged higher education sector is capable of delivering outcomes that would facilitate transformation of our country as into a major knowledge economy. And there are serious doubts about both in absence of a complete overhaul of the education sector. But fuller answer to this would depend on a detailed analysis of the following following aspects. One is access, second is quality, third is affordability, and fourth is employability of higher education system in India today. Let's begin talking about the access. You know, the typical way of measuring access is the indicator called gross enrollment ratio. That is, what you ask a question, what is the age group for the higher education? It is taken as 18 to 23. In that age group, what percentage of population have access to higher education? That is called gross enrollment ratio. The latest number that we have, the gross enrollment ratio in the year 2007-2008 in India was only 12.4%, which is absolutely nothing. In fact, the world average of GER was 24%. Even if you take the average for developing countries, the average GER is 18%, and we are stuck at 12.5%. And we are hoping that by end of the 11th five-year plan, that is by the year 11-12, we will achieve a level of 15%. We may, but that is not going to be enough to match. Thank you. That is not going to be enough to match the growth requirements of the higher economic growth. Now, I'm not even comparing India there with developed countries. The developed country average is 58% of GER, and we are stuck at 12.4%, which means we have a long way to go. Earlier, we were talking about a target of 20% for the 12th five-year plan, but increasingly it is being recognized that even that is not going to be sufficient. The example of China would be very, very important. Until the year 1999, India's GER and China GER was more or less same, around 6%. In 2007-8, we reached 12% and China reached 22%. So that shows there's a 10 percentage point difference in terms of the GER that China has attained in the last 11-12 years. So we need to re-look at our target of 20% in the 12th five-year plan, and there is active consideration going. It is likely that this target may be revised to 25%, but the final decision is still not been taken. The Honorable Minister Kapil Sibal has been talking about 30%, but do you realize to take it from 12.4% in 2007-8 to 25 or 30% would mean enormous investment from the public sector and a very significant contribution coming from private sector. So it's not something which looks within the realm of possibility. Even with 25% GER, if that target is raised, our 504 universities that we have today may have to be increased to maybe 12 to 1500 universities. And the numbers can grow even further. So the amount of investment that would be required is going to be very huge. At this point of time, I only say that the government is completely conscious of the need to step up the investment to raise the GER from unacceptably low level as of now of 12.4% to possibly 25% in the next 7 to 8 years, or maybe next in 10 years. But this is sheer access. Even for access, please note that there are serious problems. 12.4% of GER is low enough. But if you divide this 12.4% in terms of rural and urban, male and female, in scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, minorities, poor and non-poor, what do we see? Even the regional disparities are very, very acute. You know, of this 12.4% is a national average. You know, I did some quick calculation. You know, out of all the states that we have, states and union territories, 18 states and union territories had higher GER than the national average. All the remaining ones were lower than 12.4. As far as technical education is concerned, only 5 states in India account for half the number of higher and technical educational institutions. So there is a very serious regional bias involved, or regional disparity that is involved. And this is further compounded by multiple other disparities like rural-urban divide, male-female gap, social gaps, scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, Muslims, non-Muslims, and so on. You know, I have done some calculation based on the social groups. This is somewhat old data, but that is the latest data that we have in terms of breakup. This is 2004-2005 data. Can you imagine if you divide these 12.4% into scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, minorities, male, female, rural, urban, poor, non-poor. In the scheduled caste or scheduled tribe girls in the rural area, can you imagine that GER is no more than 2%? And I think all of us must hang our head in shame that after 63 years, we have such a large chunk of society where 98% of the people do not even have access to higher education. So this is unacceptably low, and we will have to give focused attention. This underscores the imperative need for a massive and inclusive expansion. But this is about expansion. What about quality? Quality is a very serious problem with the prevailing system of higher education in India. And there I would like to highlight, there are many issues, but I want to highlight at least 3. First, the curricula of several courses in most universities are seriously out of alignment. Seriously out of alignment. Secondly, a discomfortingly large proportion of college teachers are blissfully unaware of the recent advances in their own subjects. Even in good universities, I have seen there are places where teachers are teaching from the guides. There are teachers who have not learned anything and they use the same kind of notes that they had taken when they were doing their masters. I used to call that Indian version of the yellow pages, because they have all turned yellow. There are people, no, it is not a laughing matter. We're talking about the future of our next generation. We're talking about our future, of our children and grandchildren and future. So, this is something which is really very serious. So, teaching fraternity and, a very large, this I think is a very lethal combination. The courses, the content of courses out of line and teachers out of sync. You can't do worse than that. This is a lethal combination which is playing havoc with future of our country. The third major factor affecting the quality is that research output from our Indian universities has been stagnant, has been growing very slowly. There are no firm numbers, but anecdotal evidence and sketchy, rather unreliable numbers, but whatever numbers available show that until 1988, the total research output of Indian universities was comparable to the research output of the Chinese university. And I'm sure there are lots of people here and everywhere who believe that, well, in India we have larger number of people who speak good English and all that. It's all thing of the past. Today, Chinese universities put together, on one estimate, they produce 5 times more papers than the papers produced by all the Indian universities put together. So they have gone way ahead. So research is also an aspect which is suffering very badly. As a combined result of these three problems, the quality of higher education system in India leaves much to be desired. The quality has been assessed by an agency called National Assessment and Accreditation Council, NAAC. NAAC has been in operation for last 14 years, from 1996. How many universities have they graded? Or what is the proportion of universities that they have graded? Only about 1/3. 2/3 of the universities have not been graded. Among the colleges, they have graded so far only about 17% of the colleges have been assessed. Others have not been assessed. And one of the most important change that is taking place, why is this happening? That is because accreditation is not mandatory. One of the most important change, and I'm going to come to that is happening, is that every institution would be having a mandatory accreditation. And it would have to be put out on the website in a completely transparent manner. But I'll come back to that. So we have an accreditation agency, but because the accreditation was not mandatory, it has done very little so far. In 16 years, they have covered, 15 years, they have covered less than 25% of the total number of institutions that we have. Then the other aspect, the third aspect, and there is an aspect of affordability. The cost structure of higher education that is emerging, especially in the private sector, is very high and is virtually unaffordable for a very large mass of student population. In effect, therefore, access to higher education is effectively denied to a very large strata of Indian society. The fourth aspect about the quality, fourth aspect about the status of higher education is employability. There is, and I have been very disturbed about this, and lots of things I could do in Pune University, but we don't have time to go into that. There is a kind of chasm developing between the kind of education that our universities are imparting and the needs of the society, the needs of the industry. And that chasm, that gap has been widening. It is as if, education has nothing to do with the society. Our founding fathers had envisioned that education and society will grow together, hand in hand, in tandem. In fact, they would grow in a mutually reinforcing manner. The education will change depending on the changing societal needs, and society would reflect changes which are taking place in education. So they were supposed to move together hand in hand. That has stopped happening about 30 years back. So, both have gone in their own way, and this has raised a very serious question about relevance of the kind of education that we are giving. About engineers, there have been several surveys. The most conservative survey has shown, most conservative survey has shown that 1/3 of the engineers that we produce are simply unemployable. Some surveys have said the proportion is 50%, 60%, even 70%. But even if you take 1/3 of engineers that we produce, if they are simply unemployable, we have to sit back and ask a question, what has gone wrong? So there is a serious question about the employability of the students who turn out, which are turned out by the educational system. Well, today, as we know, ladies and gentlemen, profound changes are sweeping the world. Profound changes are sweeping the world, and the pace of change has dramatically accelerated with the forces of globalization, revolutionary advances in information and communication technology, and socio-political transformation, which poses challenges as well as presents opportunities for higher education in India as well as elsewhere. But there are serious deficiencies in our higher education system that we as a nation must address, and address them urgently. According to the National Knowledge Commission, the deep-seated malady of higher education system is not yet discernible simply because there are pockets of excellence. IITs here or IIMs there. And there is an enormous reservoir of very talented young people and intense competition in the admission process for those prestigious institutions like IITs and IIMs. While the country may be, as this has been pointed out by National Knowledge Commission, while the country may be legitimately proud of the international standing of some of our institutions, the IITs and IIM, but handful of these world-class institutions is not going to be sufficient to bring in the knowledge society that we envision. In fact, our transition towards becoming an economic superpower and securing a place of pride in the Committee of Nations critically depends on a complete overhaul of our higher education sector, in which calls for a very comprehensive and far-reaching reforms. Now, please don't get me wrong. I must, before I proceed, I must say that there is no need to belittle the achievements that we have made so far. In India, the significant expansion of higher education that has taken place with notable democratization. Higher education in India is no longer a privilege of the children of the elite or that of the educated high caste middle class families. More and more youth from erstwhile marginalized strata of society are looking at higher education as a panacea, a means to transcend the class and caste barriers. Regrettably, the higher education system today is neither well equipped to meet the growing aspirations of this very large mass of society, nor is it well positioned to facilitate India's transition to global economy. The unmistakable conclusion that one arrives at, regrettably, is that without major reforms which have been long overdue, the Indian higher education system is unlikely to be able to facilitate the achievement and sustenance of the high real GDP trajectory that is currently being envisioned. So what are the third part of my presentation is what are the major systemic challenges? I want to divide, based on the assessment that I have given, there are three sets of challenges that we need to face currently. One is the expansion with inclusion. Second, academic reforms. And third, reforms in the regulatory framework. And in all these areas, a lot of things are happening, to which I'm going to turn. But let me give you a rundown of the major systemic challenges that the higher education system in India have today, starting with the expansion with inclusion. There, what we need is expansion and upgradation of infrastructure and facilities, reduction of regional, social, gender and income imbalances and disparities, greater private sector involvement, including through public-private partnership, permitting entry of top-class foreign universities. This is expansion with inclusion. The second category is academic reform. In academic reforms, we need a revision in curricula and improved pedagogy, semester system, credit-based courses, examination reforms, competency enhancement of faculty, promotion and upgradation of research. Some of these are very, very imperatively needed. And the third set of reforms that we need is reforms in the regulatory framework, which to my mind include providing autonomy to universities, ensuring accountability, a major quality improvement including through accreditation, reducing multiplicity of regulatory agencies and improving effectiveness of regulation, prevention of malpractices, and providing an effective adjudication mechanism. This is a big list of the challenges that we are facing, and I dare say that most of these are being addressed in some form or other. The kind of changes which are taking place, to which this is the final set of my comments, what are the kind of changes that are taking place, and what is the kind of framework that is emerging? What is the kind of institutional architecture that is envisioned for taking our country from the present state to make it a knowledge society, to achieve excellence in education and therefore take it to the higher level of economic growth and to take it to a knowledge society that we all cherish. The first and most important of the change that is taking place, there are 5 major proposals which are at various stages of discussion. The first and most comprehensive one, most important one to my mind, is the proposal for NCHER, that is establishment of National Commission for Higher Education and Research, NCHER. You know, there were 2 very influential committees that were appointed. One was the Yashpal Committee and the other one was the National Knowledge Commission. Both of these committees unanimously argued, unanimously gave their assessment that what we have in the system, in the higher education system, regulatory framework, is that there is over-regulation, but there is under-governance. There are 15 different agencies which are regulating: UGC, AICTE, NCTE, and then there are professional councils, bar council, medical council, what have you. So there are 15 different, even pharmacy council. So there are 15 of these regulatory bodies, and the coordination between them is not exactly exemplary. In fact, there are all kinds of turf wars, and as a Vice Chancellor I have seen how much running around you have to do. You have to run to the state government, you have to go to UGC, you have to go to AICTE, you have to go to NCTE, you have to keep going. The Vice Chancellor has to spend so much time because they are kingdoms of their own, and they are, you know, the net result. And I'm not even talking about, I'm only talking about inefficiency. I'm not even talking about the corruption that was involved. And this needs to be changed. And I'm sure you are as aware as I do about the gory stories that we read in the papers about people, top people of some of these institutions either going to jail or on their way to jail, and the gory stories about the amount of money that is discovered with them. These are all stories, but then, you know, it would be finally decided by the court. So I can't go into that. But it's very clear that the credibility of the institutional framework that we have had has been seriously called into question. So one of the recommendations, so the assessment given by Yashpal as well, Yashpal Committee as well as National Knowledge Commission, was that you change all that and all of them should be put together in terms of one big agency called National Commission on Higher Education and Research. So UGC would be, you know, if that bill is approved, if it becomes act with the approval of the parliament, then UGC will be closed down, AICTE will be closed down, NCTE would be closed down. They would become part of NCHER. And as far as the councils are concerned, professional councils are concerned, what will happen is those councils, as far as the education part is concerned, that would be taken away from them and that would be given to NCHER. And as far as the practice part is concerned, for example, if you take law education, Bar Council should have nothing to do with law education. That should be handled by NCHER. That is the proposal. Whereas giving registration to lawyers, registration to those who want to practice law, that will continue to be with the Bar Council. Same thing applies to Medical Council. So those kind of proposals are made. And I must mention this, that I don't remember any time enactment was being done in such an open and transparent manner. You know, after these reports were submitted, the Prime Minister appointed a task force. You know, these both reports are very good, very thorough, very comprehensive, but they are kind of noble intentions. You have to convert those noble intentions into brick and mortar, a structure. For that, the Prime Minister appointed through MHRD, there was a task force appointed, and I'm part of that task force. This task force of 7 people, you know, we had series of meetings and we created the first draft of legislation for establishment of National Commission on Higher Education Research. And that was put on the website for anybody to see and comment. And we received lots of comments. Then what we did next was, in the last 3 months, was that the task force took that draft and we went to 12 different places in the country, including Ahmedabad. That was the last time I came to Ahmedabad. And it was presented and discussed with the vice chancellors, senior academics, and also with the officials of the state government who are working on the education, in the respect of education. So we took a lot of feedback from them. Some of that was acceptable, some of that was not acceptable, but we collected feedback and we revised that NCHER draft. And the second draft was also put on the website, on which also comments were sought. And in the month of June, there was a meeting of, that is the highest body as far as education is concerned, called Central Advisory Board on Education, CABE. The Central Board of Advisory Education, all the state education ministers are part of that. So in the meeting that we had in June, which was presided over by Honorable Minister Kapil Sibal, that draft was, third draft was circulated and it was discussed, and generally it was agreed that it was generally acceptable. There are lots of pluses and minuses, negatives, and a lot of opposition to many of the provisions, but in a democracy that is something that is expected. So it has gone through a thorough consideration, and it was decided then that the state governments will be given 1 more month to give their considered views of the final, on the final round. And we are in the process of receiving that, and in the next few days the task force will meet again and will take on board all the feedback, written and oral feedback that we have received in the final round, and that would become a cabinet note. I mean, we would then finalize. Even today, it is still a property of the task force. It's not a property of the Ministry of Human Resource Development. It is a property of the task force. That one, what we will do is that when we submit our report in the near future, that report would possibly form the basis of the cabinet note that would be moved by the Ministry of Human Resource Development. And once that is approved in the cabinet, then it would, it is expected that it will go to the, winter session of the Parliament. So if all goes well, by early next year, you will see a major change that will take place. There are many aspects of this which I cannot go into detail, but in the question answer maybe I can. So this is going to be a major change, but to just give you a quick snapshot of what are the major things involved there, it involves giving a large amount of autonomy to the universities. States have been complaining that this is anti-government, this is going against the principle of federalism. You know, we are going a step further. The autonomy is being given to the universities rather than to the states. So, and the states have a representation. I will come into the details of that, but there are many issues which are hotly being debated. There would be an Acharya Kul that would be created, there would be a general council, and what this will do is to promote autonomy. It will also have a regulatory framework encompassing all this. It will also promote research. It will also promote vocational education. So it has a very, very important role to play in bringing our higher education system consistent with the growth objectives that we have over the long run, and the ultimate objective of making a transition towards the knowledge economy. So that is one bill. There are 4 other bills which I will quickly cover and stop. Second one is establishment of educational tribunals. Any one of you who has ever worked as a vice chancellor or a senior office bearer of a university would know that one of the favorite habits of academics is to keep complaining. So there are complaints from the students, teachers, management, administration, what have you. Every day in Pune University, I used to get this big bundle of complaints. Everybody complaining about everybody else. You know, if the vice chancellor puts his mind to that, there will be no time left for growth and development of the university. So this needs, but this doesn't mean that you can ignore that. But this is not something that the vice chancellor should be spending so much time. Because most of that is settling the old scores and all kinds of things, which you know it as well as I do. But the point is, there is a bill moved which will create educational tribunals at the state government level, and there would be educational tribunals created at the central government level with the involvement of Supreme Court judges at the central government tribunal and High Court judges at the state government, level tribunal. and most of these issues which need adjudication would be referred to that. And I can tell you that this is going to be a big relief to the vice chancellors, who can focus on promoting the university, the growth and development, and implement his vision, rather than getting into the nitty-gritties of complaints made by everybody against everybody else. That's the second one. Third one, very important one. I told you about the accreditation and the poor level of accreditation that we have achieved so far. Now this will change, because there is a third bill that is being created. That is already, by the way, the second bill that I talked about the tribunals, has already been approved by the cabinet, and it has been tabled in the parliament. Other than NCHER, all the 4 other bills that I am talking about, they are already tabled in the parliament, and they can come up for discussion anytime. The third one that I want to talk about is the regulatory authority for mandatory accreditation of higher educational institutions. I told you about the poor progress that NAC has made so far about accreditation. Only less than 25%, 33% of universities, 17% of colleges are the only ones which are accredited. Now, no longer. If all goes well, and if that bill is approved by the parliament, every educational institution will have to go through compulsory mandatory accreditation, and they have to displace their ranking on the website of that institution. This would apply not only to universities, this would also apply to individual departments of university. This would also apply to individual colleges. So everything would be done in a completely transparent manner. The bill is for establishing a regulatory authority which will permit a large number of institutions to act as official accreditation agencies. Because if you rely on NAC, it will take another 50 years to complete the first round, and we can't. So there has to be a large number of institutions which will be doing the accreditation of the universities, colleges, as well as individual departments of universities. Because even in the second or third rate universities, there may be 1 or 2 departments which is truly world class. They should not be held down because of the overall poor ranking of the university. So universities would be ranked, the colleges would be ranked, and individual departments of universities will also be ranked. So this will be done through the process of mandatory accreditation. The fourth one is very, very important: prohibition of certain unfair practices in technical and medical educational institutions and universities. Now this is going to be very, very important, because we all know about the kind of malpractices that take place, and many of us have suffered from that, and this has to change. Can you imagine that today? This is really amazing. You know, I'm in charge of education in Planning Commission, and when I was watching the football game, I saw the ads of some universities as the largest university in our country. And believe me, I had never heard of that university. You know, you can make any claim in your advertisement, and even if those claims are totally false, can you imagine? There is nothing in the law which will bring them to books. What is this? You know, there are all kinds of malpractices, you know, giving wrong impression, wrong image, you know, making wrong claims which are not verified. They're great, they have never subject themselves to grading. How many bogus institutions are there? There can be, I can't name in my position, but I can tell you that there are many institutions in Delhi and elsewhere where their research and development budget is 0, but their advertisement budget is 25 crore rupees. What does that tell you? You know, and I'm sure you see a full page ads of many universities which have never been graded, which have never been ranked, which have about the information about their quality is not available. Independent evaluation has never been done. Why? This has to change. There is nothing in the law today which will bring such universities and capitation fee is again a very big problem, and we all know that. Even take the case of the prospectus. There are many institutions which will publish 20,000 copies of the prospectus, and every applicant must buy it. And they charge 300 rupees, and they earn income on the ads also in that prospectus. Why? The information about that institution should be available on the website. Why should be compulsory for everybody to buy that blessed prospectus? If you are applicant, you have to buy it. With the application, you have to buy it. And then they charge so much for that. And nobody is punishing them. Nobody is bringing them to books because there is no provision to bring them to books. Their information, and they will not talk about their ranking because they have never bothered about ranking. They have gone by the claims that they make in the advertisement, but they don't find it necessary to actually get those claims verified, tested by a third-party agency and then claim. So that is, there are several other, taking money and not giving receipt, allowing students to sit in the classes without their having gone through the regular process or their taking entrance exam. These are just few of the malpractices which have crept in the last few years, and the amount of money involved is unbelievably large. And this has to be sorted out. So there is this bill for the first time which will aim at curbing the unfair practices in technical and medical educational institutions and universities. That brings me to the fifth major bill, that is the regulation of entry and operations of the foreign educational institutions. Now there is a lot of talk and debate about how this will work, and there are people who are never tired of saying that, oh, you are allowing this foreign university, they are going to come and sweep everything that we have. No such thing is likely to happen. If you remember, I am a banker originally, and I was with the Reserve Bank for so long. In 1993, I remember when private sector banks were allowed fresh licenses. After a long gap, we started, I'm still saying we, I'm no longer with RBI. RBI started issuing these private licenses, and there was a brouhaha, and everybody started shouting, what will happen to the public sector banks? Now, this privatization will kill all the public sector banks. What do we find after 17 years? Public sector banks have become stronger than what they were. In fact, the dose of competition has gotten the best out of them. Now the private banks are flourishing and the public sector banks are even doing much better. So they have survived. Not only they have survived, there is no compulsion. There was no compulsion for them to put their act together and improve until they had to face the competition from private banks. And that is what has happened. If we are talking about 1,200 universities in the next 10 years, or 1,500 universities, how many foreign universities would be there? No more than 100. Nobody knows how many will actually come. So we are not really talking about, any university coming and sweeping us. But the only care that we need to take and is to make sure that B and C grade universities don't come here. Only the good universities must come. Sometimes a foreign name, quote unquote, has a lot of effect with people. They are not necessarily great universities, and so the mechanism must be, appropriate mechanism would have to be devised to make sure that only good universities come, and they come with the research capabilities. That is something that is required. I would not be alarmist about this thing happening at all. In fact, that should be a welcome change, and that would bring in the fresh air of competition in the higher education sector. These are the 5 bills which are pending at various levels. In addition to this, there are at least 3 major changes which are taking place, which I want to just briefly mention. One is very active consideration is being given to creation of innovation universities with world-class standards. There is no final decision taken as yet, but it would be taken soon, and it is very much under active consideration. Then one more change that is taking place, very important one, is that PPP model, the public-private partnership model has been used in infrastructure in many areas, but in education we have not made a beginning. In the last 6 months or so, we have been debating about PPP model. We have introduced it partly in ITI, partly in the school education and higher education. That is currently being debated, what would be the ideal model to suit our conditions, but that will also happen. Finally, please note that there is a extensive review of deemed to be universities which is being undertaken. For those of you who do not know, that we have 131 deemed to be universities, and all of them were strongly recommended for approval by the UGC. What happened was, because of the complaints that were received, the government, MHRD, appointed a special task force to review the working of those 131 deemed to be universities, and they divided them into three categories. A category is those deemed to be universities which are good and must be encouraged, because this is not against any private institution. So those which are run very well, those who have earned a good name, those which must continue. B grade are those universities, or B class was given to those institutions which were not up to mark, but those who had potential to be there. With some changes, with given some time, those who could reach that level. And third was the category C class, which was hopeless institutions, which have no hope whatsoever. Totally hopeless institutions, which are not even worth. Government, and please note that most of these, if not all, the deemed universities come with a lot of political baggage. We know the realities in our country, but still government took a very bold decision to actually de-license those 45 universities. Now this was really a very bold step, which clearly showed that the government means business and we really want to put our act together. You know, something that cannot go on. Now it went to the court, higher court, and the court has given a stay, and I don't know what the outcome will be, but the intention of the government is very, very clear that we want to encourage more and more universities, but not on their terms. It should be on the terms which are acceptable to everybody in the country. Moral of the story is that I think we are poised, you know, trite as it may sound, we are at a stage where, you know, we are at crossroads. You know, it sounds very trite to say that we are at a crossroad, but truly we are at the crossroad. When was the last time such a large chunk of people, 240 million people, were making a transition to adolescence? This is our time. The window of demographic dividend that is available to us is going to be available to us for only 15 to 20 years, not more. So this is the time to put our act together, and that is exactly what government is trying to do, and all of us are trying to do. And it is, from your point of view, let me say that in any process of change, the key to the future success lies in assimilating what is happening and adapting oneself to the new and emerging architecture. I'm sure all of you who are associated with education will take note of the kind of metamorphic changes which are taking place, so as to remain on top of the changes, to make the best use of the changes in a manner that is completely transparent, completely accountable, and in a manner and spirit which is consistent with the spirit which Shri Ramanlal Patel exhibited in his role as an educationist. I want to thank the organizers, particularly the Ramanbhai Patel AMA Center for Excellence in Education and Ahmedabad Management Association for having given me this opportunity to come here and talk to you and pay my tributes to this great educationist and multifaceted personality. And I'm also grateful to all of you for giving me a patient hearing. Thank you very much.
So I would like to thank Ramanbhai Patel Foundation for setting up this center for AMA, under whose auspicious memorial lecture it was held. It is being held every year, and we are getting such able personalities to deliver such lecture. As we all know, Ramanbhai Patel AMA Center for Excellence in Education is dedicated to memory of late Sri Ramanbhai Patel, who was one of the pioneers of pharmaceutical industry. Beyond that, the family is deeply involved in the education, and within a very short span of time, the education institutes founded by them have become a big name to reckon with at a basic level of schooling. In a fitting tribute to a person who believed that learning cannot be an end to itself, today the Ramanbhai Patel Foundation is committed to a number of special initiatives in the field of education. I once again thank all of you to attend this function and make it successful program. And a special thanks to Dr. Jadhav to be here. I would request our President Pankaj Bhai Patel to offer a memento from AMA.
Thank you, sir.